Hello everybody and welcome to the Whiskey Dictionary. Tonight we're going to be talking about the Caol Ila 12. This is a single malt Scotch whiskey from the island of Islay. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the history and then about the whiskey, and then we'll talk a little bit about nosing and tasting. If you'd like some timestamps down below, you can go ahead and find those in the description. But let's go ahead and talk about Caol Ila Distillery. Now Caol Ila is derived from the Gaelic term that means Sound of Islay. And the reason that they did this is because the Caol Ila distillery is basically right across the Strait of Islay from Jura. So they say, hey, we're on the strait. This is the Sound of Islay. That's about all there is to it. Now, it was founded in 1846, and unfortunately, Caol Ila just doesn't have a ton of unique history to it. I looked into it for quite a while. A lot of times distilleries, they fall into one of two camps. There's either the ones that have this crazy, awesome, rich history with, I don't know, like there was a king and there were like lords and super old and everybody's been there forever, blah, blah, blah. And then there's the other ones where it's like, yeah, we've been around forever. We didn't do anything. We closed down a few times. World War II shut us down. And that's where Caol Ila ends up. But like a history of a distillery is just kind of the icing on the cake. It really is just what's about in the glass. But, there's a Whiskey Dictionary. That's what I like to teach you guys about, is the history of the brand. So it kind of makes me a little sad when there's nothing interesting about the history of the brand. But I guess the lack of anything interesting is something sort of interesting. But anyway. So in addition to making their single malts, which they have several different offerings, they have the 12, the 13 was around for a little while, the 15, the 18, they have the Mock, I believe it's pronounced Mock, I'll put it up here on the screen. They have a cask strength version, then they have Moscatel finish, as well as a few others that they come out with every now and then. But their main business, about 95% of their business actually has to do with feeding Johnnie Walker. So 95% of what's produced at Caol Ila ends up in Johnnie Walker Red and Johnnie Walker Black. And there's several other different brands. I'll put them all down here just to not waste time. But many people use Caol Ila in their blends. All right, let's go ahead and get into the nosing and the tasting. You guys have told me before this is your favorite part of the episode, so I want to just kind of get into it. I poured this just a minute ago just to give it, briefest of minutes to kind of breathe and relax in the glass. The legs on here are mostly non-existent. It's 43% ABV, so that's not entirely a surprise. It is artificially colored and it is chill filtered. So it's kind of funny though, like when you look at the color, maybe they're trying to imply something with the color, that this is not heavily peated. They're getting their malt from Port Ellen, and I believe it's about 30 ppm. So it's not going to be crazy smoky, but it will have some character there. But it's interesting. I'm only just coming up with this thought right now. I'm wondering if they have this light color to kind of give you the idea that this isn't going to be a challenging whiskey, because it's not. It's a great whiskey. Well, we'll get into that, but it is a good starter into Islay whiskeys. But like I said, we'll evaluate that in the overall. Let's go ahead and get into the nosing. So it's not the best nose I've ever smelled, but it's far from the worst. It's not very complex is part of the problem. It has very definitive notes, and I'll kind of just get into this just so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. So it starts off as lemon, and it kind of immediately follows up with a coastal breeze, kind of salt air brininess to it, but it's not heavy brine like what you'd find in something like a Lefroy or a Lagavulin or an Ardbeg or even, what do you call it? Even like Talisker. It's there and you notice it, and it's not unpleasant. It's salt air. So it's kind of nice, but let's see. Little salty, little oily. It's kind of opening up just a tad, but one of the main things I'm getting is this iodine kind of nose that you get in a lot of Islay whiskeys. All right, let's go ahead and give this thing a taste. Cheers. Now, this is where I'm gonna go into this bit. This has a lot of the flavors that I think are beneficial to introduce somebody to a peated whiskey, especially ones from Islay. This has all of the notes, just not in the most flattering of ways. I definitely sound like I'm bashing this a bit, and I'm not meaning to come off that way, but I don't want to sing too much praises here either. So trying to keep this as even keeled as I can. This tastes pretty good. It's got salt. It's got lemon on the taste. Salty, lemon, definitely some peat smoke in there, but not crazy heavy. For 30 ppm, actually, I'm a little surprised it doesn't taste more like peat. This has an oiliness that's mostly coating my mouth. One thing I will give it to its credit is that the finish on this is quite long. I'm actually still kind of waiting for this to calm down for a second before I have another sip. Now, here's an interesting thing. You might be able to see this. Yeah, you can definitely see this. So, thanks to the patrons for helping me to buy an external monitor for my camera. So useful. I can actually see. I used to look at this little tiny screen. Now it's a 5-inch screen. So much easier. Anyway, so you guys can see this bottle. This bottle's about half empty. Now, I did almost all of that damage about 3 nights ago. So it is very easy to drink. And I did regret it a little bit the next morning, but it is very easy to drink. And surprisingly will go away much faster than you expect too. So that definitely is something beneficial here. This is where we're talking overall in my general recommendation. So for those of you that don't know, I typically give a rating of stock it, buy it, try it, ignore it. And I think those are pretty self-explanatory. Stock it is kind of a unusual one where even some things that I think are like, mediocre might still get a stock it, like Jack Daniels, for example. I do think it's always worth it to have some Jack Daniels on hand. Just people come to your house, they enjoy it. So in the case of Caol Ila 12, I think this is something that is... I think this is okay. I don't think this is something that you need to have in your life, but I do think that you should judge kind of for yourself and what your situation is. If you know that you're going to be introducing people to peated whiskeys as part of your repertoire, part of the thing that makes you you is doing whiskey tastings with your friends. I know it is for me. This actually could be a good one to keep on hand. I'd still give it like a buy it. But if that's not you, if you maybe just kind of have some friends who are way more experienced with whiskey, or maybe, none of your friends really like whiskey and they're drinking, I don't know, something else, just beers while you're sipping on your whiskey, maybe not so much. I think you can get away without having this one. I would almost recommend you to just get like a Talisker if you want to have the same kind of taste. It will be a lot easier to find a Talisker than this because unfortunately, Caol Ila, because of COVID and everything, had to close down. And then they took advantage to it and they're doing a remodel of their entire distillery again for like the 8th time. But they have completely closed down and that's what they're doing right now. So it's actually very hard to get this. If you're in Scotland and if you're on Islay, you can actually go to Lagavulin and they have some that you could buy there, which I thought was an interesting thing. But either way, so this gets my rating, my personal rating of try it. I think if you just pick one of these up at a bar, you're going to taste it and be like, oh, okay, that's what Bill meant. But if you do find yourself in that situation where you are, in fact, like having people try a lot of whiskeys, this is probably an okay one to have on hand, and I would suggest that you buy it. But anyway, let's see what you guys thought. Out of 750 votes, 12% of you said to stock it, 16% said to buy it, 18% said to try it, 5% said to ignore it, and 49% have never had it. Now, I think those are interesting values because it is definitely leaning a little bit higher in the scale, but between buy it and try it, it's also even. So it sounds a little bit like you guys kind of agree with what I was just saying, but I don't know. Let's see. We have a couple more comments here. So Brian R says, if you're expecting a Laphroaig or Lagavulin, you'll be disappointed. It's quite a bit softer. From what I remember, it's like stripping all the brine and leaving just a soft scotch with a peat element. Now, I find that interesting. I actually included this comment specifically because personally, I disagree, but it sounds like he hasn't had it in a while. I think that there's plenty of brine left in here, and I do actually think the peat is under represented. So Either way, interesting. Thanks for commenting, Brian. Jim Morris says, Caol Ila is a classic single malt that everyone should try at least once in their whiskey journey. It's also an ideal gateway to peated Islay Scotch, and there are great independent bottlings as well. Now, I also heard that while I was doing my research, a lot of people were suggesting that you find an independent bottling of Caol Ila. So if you have the ability to do that, that actually might be a way to go. I can't speak from experience, but there were a lot of comments I ran into online. The last is Jonathan C. Not bad, but in my opinion, there's better offerings from Islay. Kind of with you. Actually, I can say almost all of the offerings that I've already reviewed and or going to review this month, I would say are better offerings. But this is far from bad. I've definitely spent the last, 8 minutes kind of bashing this, and I don't want to. It's not bad at all. It's just one of the least good Islay scotches. So keep that in mind when you're making your choice. All right. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me here on the Whiskey Dictionary. I will see you next week with another Islay whiskey. It's going to be a good one. Cheers.